Oh, I was wondering about that. Our first hymn this morning, get your voices ready. It's number 175 in the gray hymnal. We celebrate the web of life. If you will stand as you are able. 175. For opening words. Many UUs suffer from a chronic identity crisis. People ask us, what do you believe? And we freeze. We don't know what to say because UUs believe so many things, so many different things. Some have called us priests of paradox, apostles of ambiguity. Ouch. And so UUA produces 7 principles, soon to be 8, and 6 sources and countless pamphlets, and even those little wallet cards that kind of remind us of what we believe. Kind of, or maybe with all our hearts. We're even encouraged to compose elevator speeches, summations of UUism so pithy that they could be recited between floors on an elevator. Do we believe in God? Question simple, answer impossible. Define God. Define believe. Define we. Yeah, while you're at it, define in. However you understand that word God, I know he doesn't even care. Jesus doesn't either, and I know Buddha doesn't care what we believe. The important question is not what we believe, but what we love and what we do with that love. Its impact on our lives and others. I know I'm preaching to the choir here. So now back to those 7 principles. Unitarian Universalists affirm and promote as their first the inherent worth and dignity of every person. This means that we must treat everyone as a person of worth and dignity. And as Dr. French reminds us, that can be really hard to do. Loving our fellow humans can be a full-time challenge. Worth and dignity of all, like every single one. In preparing for today, I had a chance to read the takes of different UU ministers on this, as well as people from the pew like us. I found Reverend Victoria Weinstein, who I consider my friend, though she doesn't know me. I love her writing. She takes a take on this subject, and I'll share a few thoughts. For her, accepting everyone as having inherent worth and dignity means a way of being in relationship with the world, not a celebration of individualism as some may think, but rather a humble awareness of those whose voices are not heard, whose presence has historically not been welcome, who are forgotten and devalued. That's a mindful right there. She goes on to remind us that our societies are set up in such a way as to dazzle our eyes with illusions that some people are good and worthy and others don't quite make the list. And naively, we walk around actually thinking that maybe we know which from which. I'm looking forward to Dr. Franch's talk and thinking about the tough questions our first principle asks of us. And as importantly, hearing your answers during the discussion. Our responsive reading this morning is the insert in your order of service. It's by our old friend, Max Kutz. We used to hear a lot more from him in pre-COVID days. But he's so wonderful, we couldn't let this season go by without this Thanksgiving prayer. So I'll read the first line and then, well, maybe we'll just read it together because it's not equally distributed. Okay. Let us give thanks for a bounty of people, for children who are our second planting, and though they grow like weeds and the wind too soon blows them away, may they forgive us our cultivation and finally remember where their roots are. For generous friends with hearts and smiles as bright as their blossoms, for feisty friends as tart as apples, for continuous friends who like scallions and cucumbers keep reminding us that we had them, for crotchety friends as sour as rhubarb and as indestructible, for handsome friends who are as gorgeous as eggplants and as elegant as a row of corn, and the other plain as potatoes and as good for you. For funny friends who are silly as Brussels sprouts and as amusing as Jerusalem artichokes, and serious friends as complex as cauliflower and as intricate as onions. For friends as unpretentious as cabbages, as subtle as summer squash, as persistent as parsley, as delightful as dill, as endless as zucchini, and who, like parsnips, can be counted on to see you through the winter. For old friends nodding like sunflowers in the evening time, and young friends coming on as fast as radishes. For loving friends who wind around us like tendrils and hold us despite our blights, wilts, and witherings. And finally, for those friends now gone, like gardens past that have been harvested, and who fed us in their time, that we might have life thereafter. For all of these, we give thanks. Thank you, Max Kutz, for that. And now we have our acknowledgments of the heart, that special time when we share joys and concerns or sorrows with each other. I'll invite you to come to the mic and I will light the candle. The first one I'd like this morning is for the survivors of COVID, which would be all of us, for those who have helped us along the way, and for those in our congregation and everywhere who are suffering with illness today, physical, mental, or emotional. This is for your health and healing. Would someone else like to come forward with a joy or concern?
I lost a good friend last week. His name was Tim Conaway. Tim was the typical Irishman, just a little bit overweight, round, chilly face, even a little bit of red in his cheeks. One of the nicest guys you'll ever meet. I worked with him for about between 25 and 30 years. I don't remember exactly when I met him, but we worked together for a long time. And then after we retired, we both kept in touch, not every day, but enough to keep our friendship together. I remember seeing a young salesman and watched him grow as he worked his way up through our organization. And finally, he became the senior vice president of our company. Pretty good job for a multi-billion-dollar company. Yet he never changed. He's always the same. I walk into his office, in which he complains to the, he was going to change it and turn it into a dance floor, he said. And he would always get up, almost always, and I'd walk around his desk, grab him by the hand, and say, "How you doing, Jimmy?" One of the few guys who called me Jimmy. Got a feeling there'll be a few more after today. Anyhow, I think so many things about Tim. The one thing is that he was a great guy. He's a bright light in my life, and it's a light that's going out now. But I don't know, at an early age of 74, what a great guy, and I'll miss him.
This story started out as a joy and ended with a note of concern. I took my 5-year-old granddaughter to the parade on Friday, which was a total joy. She was the best parade going companion I can imagine. She loved every shining tow truck that came lumbering and honking down the street. She was willing to wait. As parades are never on time, she would run in the middle of the street and watch for it to come. And this was wonderful. And of course, at the end is the fire department. And on the very largest fire truck sat Santa Claus, who, to my joy, was African American. And I was just about to say to myself, yes, for my town and for this. I don't know whether Santa Claus has always been African American in Chestertown, because I haven't been to this parade before, but I was so glad to see him when my little blonde, loud 5-year-old turned around and said, "That isn't Santa Claus." And since she does live in Peru, she's lived in Bolivia, she's done quite a lot of traveling at a small age. She does not have an insular family, so you're left with the question, where does this come from?
Annie, I've got one. Oh, yes, I'm going to that. Wait a minute. So, I have a joy. My oldest daughter is home for Thanksgiving with her boyfriend from California. They have, kind of kicking and screaming, brought us into the 21st century. They went out, she insisted on buying us a giant smart TV. And they found a stand that fit on our thing, so we didn't have to buy new furniture. We can push it around and twist it. And they brought me an Echo. So we have been brought by my delightful daughter into the 21st century.
I say my sympathies.
Yes, and sympathies are also welcome.
Now we'll light a final candle for any joy or concern or sorrow that stays unspoken this morning, that stays in your heart. Blessed be. We will now be passing the baskets for the offering to support and sustain this place, which is special to us, a place of memory and of hope for when we are now the keepers of the flame. Thank you for your generosity, and thank you, Al, for your lovely playing. Before I invite you into a time of reflection, I'd like to introduce a minister to you. His name is David Blanchard. He received his Master's of Divinity from Harvard and then spent the next 30 years ministering to a couple UU churches up in New York State. And during this time, he had a couple sabbaticals, but the one I want to zero in on is one to Africa. It was while he was there that he met a woman from the Ubuntu tribe, and he brought this story home with him and told his congregants, and I want to share with you that same story. It goes like this. When a woman of the Ubuntu tribe knows that she is pregnant, she happily invites her women friends to go to the jungle with her, and together they pray and meditate and ask the spirit of life to tell them the song of the baby soon to be born. You see, they believe that every child is born with a song that is his or hers alone, that belongs to no one else. It will be that baby's song for the rest of his life. When that child is born, the community gathers and sings the child's song. And when the child begins his schooling, people again join, and they will again when he comes of age and he marries. Finally, at the end of life, when a soul is going from this world, family and friends gather once again to sing that familiar and singular song to accompany the soul on its journey. In the Ubuntu tribe, there is yet another occasion when the people sing the song. If at some point the person commits a crime or aberrant social act, they take the offender to the center of town, and the people of the community again form the circle, and then they sing the song once again. The tribe recognizes that the correction for antisocial behavior is not punishment, but it is the love and memory of one's true identity. When we recognize our own song, we have no desire or need to hurt anyone else. Your true friends know your song and sing when you forget it. Those who love you cannot be fooled by the mistakes that you have committed or the dark images that you show to others. They remember your beauty as you feel ugly, your totality when you feel broken, your innocence when you feel guilty, and your purpose when you're confused. And so the refrain lingers throughout a lifetime. Friends, if I stray, sing my song back to me so I can recognize my being and belonging to the human family. As I end this story, I'm also thinking of the importance of knowing our own song by heart for those lonely times when maybe the world might not be there to sing it back to us. That's usually a good time to start humming to ourselves that song that reminds us of this life that we've led, that reminds us of all that has been Maybe you'll find yourself smiling, or maybe the song might remind you of when your heart is breaking. No matter. Our songs sing back to us something of our essence, our truth, our uniqueness. Whether we hear our songs from another or from our own memory or our own hearts, it's not about approval, but about recognizing our being and belonging to that human family. It's a song that gives voice to the great mystery that carried each of us into this world and will one day carry us home. Let us take a moment now to reflect and listen carefully. You might hear a faint melody that is your own song. Blessed be. And now we have our second hymn for this morning from your great hymnal. It's number 131, Love Will Guide Us. Please stand as you are able for 131, Love Will Guide Us. And afterwards, we'll have time for a discussion, so we'll be anxious to hear your thoughts on the first principle and how you live them out. Welcome, Dr. French.
Thank you, Annie. Gee, I don't know, I feel like, you've done so much already. I've said such great things already this morning that I'm sort of just supernumerary here to things. It was nice just being here for this first part of the service. I feel like, I'm here part of a worship service too, instead of just the guy, brought in here to do the dog and pony thing. I feel it's good to be here. I've been looking forward to being back with you. I don't know, was it a year ago or so that I was here, and it was still kind of more pandemic-y, and it was kind of, we had the service and everybody fled. And so maybe you're still doing that, I don't know. Hey, let me begin to tell you, one of the most profound theological debates I ever heard was actually while I was sitting on the floor of a Sunday school classroom many years ago. And I think it encapsulates the heart and dilemma of our religion. The debaters, as far as the other teacher and I can recollect, were, 6 or 7 years old, and we must have been discussing the concept of worth with them. And they were not agreeing. The little boy, both of his parents were lawyers. His father represented people in death penalty appeals, and his mother was a juvenile defender. And so he was, really raised with this concept of, everybody's important. And little girl, Nadine, was had just a wonderful, wonderful, sharp, and a kind of oppositional intelligence. And she was not buying this worth and dignity. And they were having this big discussion, and finally Gabe, that was the boy, won her over. Nadine capitulated, sort of. And these are her exact words, as accurately as I can remember them, is, all right, everybody has worth and dignity, but some people use it up. The inherent worth and dignity is the first of the 6 principles adopted by the Unitarian Universalist Association in 1984 and ratified in 1985. And a 7th was added later, and an 8th is under consideration. This was adopted. We had a little bit of a quandary here. These 2 separate denominations, the Unitarians and the Universalists, had merged. And what did they believe? And they had been struggling. They merged in 1961. They'd been struggling for over 20 years to figure out, well, what Annie was talking about in her introductory words. What do we believe and how do we say it? Because, we have names in our denominational titles that are not particularly important to us anymore. Unitarians believed in a unity, not a trinity. But that's, I don't know, have you ever heard a sermon, based on why we should be Unitarian rather than Trinitarian? Probably not. Universalists believed in universal salvation. Everybody will eventually go to heaven. A lot of us don't believe in things like heaven and hell anymore. So that's kind of, what do we believe in? So they struggled and they came up with these principles. Note, by the way, that these principles, which you have in the front of your gray hymnal, bind congregations, not individuals. They're not a creed that you're required to believe in, but they're what congregations ascribe to. They're not a creed to which individuals must ascribe. They refer, though, to how humans relate to each other. They do not make reference to a deity. You don't have to believe in the inherent worth and dignity of any individual or any of these other principles. And frankly, we don't talk about them too much. And I think logically some of them maybe are not principles in and of themselves, but are kind of sub-principles of other principles. But we don't worry about that. And they are useful things, I think, very useful things in our non-creedal religion to help us lead, shall I say, a worthwhile life. So what I'm going to try to explore this morning is the first principle in 3 ways. What's with worth? Why the concept of worth and dignity of every individual is so important, even if maybe we just made it up. 2, perceiving the person before you. Why we focus on the individual even as we focus on community. And 3, rules. There are rules to help us believe in a way that shows that we really do believe in the worth and dignity of the individual. So, first, why is the concept of worth and dignity of every individual so important? Individual worth and dignity is not a concept that's unique to us. Other denominations and other religions stress it. Like the other principles, it deals with human behavior, not in the relationship to a deity, but it is no less a statement of faith, and its implications are profound. In some ways, the first principle harkens back to the early days of the Universalist side of our denominational name. The Universalists believed, and this was their controversial belief, that everyone will go to heaven. A loving God would not condemn his children, and God in those days was always a he. A loving God would not condemn his children to hell. Everyone goes to heaven, but maybe not right away. On this, the Universalists were divided. Some Universalists believe that some people might experience a period of, kind of post-mortem detention before they got to heaven. But ultimately, everyone was going to get in. And maybe saying that God loved everyone was a way of expressing the concept of worth. Or alternatively, maybe talking about worth and dignity is a way for people who aren't theists to talk about why we should treat people in a certain way. Maybe it's like saying that everyone is a person of worth is a way for non-theists to express what the Quakers call that of God in everyone. You can think of the word as a replacement for a mystical concept or as a mystical concept in itself. Now, keeping with this universalist thread, here's the first thought experiment for this morning. Even if you don't believe in an afterlife, take a moment to think about people that you think should never get into heaven. Then imagine them there. And think about the theology that accommodated that. This was a really radical idea, and the reasons that some states wouldn't allow universalists to testify in court or hold public office. How could you trust people who believe that everybody was going to go to heaven? You know? So, proclaiming worth and dignity about, for every individual is also a radical concept. Let's continue our thought experiment. Think of the person or persons that you despise the most. I'm sure you can think of people who don't exhibit worth and dignity. That person, the first principle says, has worth and dignity. And by inference, it means that you have to treat them as a person of worth and dignity. And how you treat that person says something about you and your adherence to your proclaimed beliefs, which are, of course, all about behavior. Hard, isn't it? And people think we have an easy religion. Why attribute worth to everyone? I've concluded it's because people have to come up with intellectual justifications for the emotions that we feel. This is another chapter, I think, in humanity's struggle to come up with reasons to treat each other decently. We need to justify empathy by by making such actions a command of a deity, or at least justified by some kind of intellectual principle. For example, in the Hebrew Bible, you find these instructions. When you reap the harvest of your land, you are not to reap to the very edges of your field or gather the gleanings of your harvest. You must not strip your vineyard bare or gather its fallen leaves. Or gather its fallen grapes. Leave them for the poor and the foreigner. I am the Lord your God. This is saying you have to care about people. That, everything that you have that you think is yours really isn't yours. You've got to share. You've got to care about the poor and the stranger. And I think the people who wrote this commandment were empathetic people, or at least sympathetic people, and they wanted to provide guidance for those people who weren't empathetic and sympathetic, and to make sure that people treated poor people well. And since they believed in a deity, and that's where the authority was in their culture, they turned to that authority. They didn't try to persuade you that people had worth. They just simply said, this is a command from God. Now, those who don't believe in a God or gods can't just say God says behave in a certain way. And I believe that the concept of human worth is one of the great human inventions, one of the greatest inventions of all time. We impute something special, which we call worth and dignity, to everyone, which implies that we must treat everyone as a person of worth and dignity. I don't believe that worth and dignity is something inherent in the same way that, say, our DNA is inherent, but that worth is something that we put there. We attribute it to others and to ourselves. Now, on this, I'm much influenced by Felix Adler, who was the founder of our cousin denomination, Ethical Culture, which was my entry into liberal religion. Adler based much of his ethical philosophy of life on the concept of worth, which he distinguished from value, the sort of value being our usefulness to people or what, how much money you have or whatever. Actually, worth is a sort of a complicating thing for us because we also use in our culture the phrase net worth. And we don't mean, how much money you have when we talk about your worth. We mean something else. Here's what Adler wrote about it. By what warrant do I ascribe worth to any human being? My answer is that I certainly do not discover the quality of worth in people to be an empirical fact. In many people, I do not even discover value. The answer to the objection is that I do not find worth in others or in myself. I attribute it to others and to myself. And why do I attribute it? In virtue of the reality-producing functions of my own mind. Now, reality-producing functions of my mind is an odd kind of phrase to us. He was a philosophic idealist, and this term came naturally to him. It basically means, though, that by thinking it up and saying it so, and more importantly, by acting on the concept, it becomes real. We act as though worth exists, and we treat people as persons of worth and dignity, and the idea becomes manifest. It becomes real. And if you want proof of the concept, just, open your wallet and take out that piece of paper we call currency, and we believe that that has value. Other people do too, and it has value. Similarly, if we behave as though people have worth, that becomes real. So wherever you are on the Unitarian Universalist spectrum, from polytheist to atheist, I think you will find that the commitment to the inherent worth and dignity of every person can work for you, can inspire you, can guide you, and very frequently confound you as to what you should do. I'll get to a rule that will help you on that in a few minutes. But first, let's consider this every person part of that statement about every person, worth and dignity of every person. So let's talk about perceiving the person before you. The first principle leads us to focus on the individual. We're very focused on groups these days, and that's appropriate. But this morning, I'm focusing on the individuals, the every person part of the first principle, the person before you part of the first principle. In our day-to-day lives, we make judgments about people. We make quick assessments. Studies show that people decide about other people within seconds. You meet somebody, you are making instant judgments. Studies show that you go for a job interview, you may talk for 20 minutes, but that interviewer, or you, if you're the interviewer, has decided within seconds whether that person is appropriate. People can look at me and think, old white guy. And that's a true perception. I own up to that. And from that description, you can infer some things about my life experience. I always feel like myself. But I know I can be perceived much differently depending on the circumstances as how I present myself. Here I am this morning in my suit. And sometimes in a church building, I have the august identity of being the Reverend Dr. Michael French. And for some kind, here I am in my suit, and on some very special occasions, I'll even wear a black robe with 3 imitation velvet stripes on the sleeves. That's what do you call it? I'm just feeling posh about myself. I don't know. And I'm treated very well on these occasions. But, I'm not always such a good addresser. Here's a once upon a time story. My late wife was a lawyer for the Maryland Legal Aid Bureau. actually it's just Maryland Legal Aid now, it was the Legal Aid Bureau when she started there, and it does civil cases for poor people. And late one afternoon, I came to pick her up, and there was a new person at the reception desk, and I walked in, and she looked up at me and she said, "I'm sorry, but reception is closed for the day." And the other person at the reception desk looked at her and said, "Oh, no, he's not a client, that's Eileen Franch's husband." Probably thinking, poor Eileen. And, I probably looked like someone who had wandered down the street from healthcare for the homeless. And so apparently, I have another identity, as Mike Franch, bum. And that's how I presented myself. Now that got me to be thinking, maybe on some Reverend Dr. Franch days, I should come dressed as Mike Franch, bum. Maybe that would make a better argument, better preaching for the worth and dignity of every person than me getting dressed up, pretending I'm someone important. Well, I don't fault the legal aid receptionist for this. We make, I fault her training, but we make quick judgments about people based on survival techniques that evolution has built into us. But we are also socially, but these things are also social. There are also socially inculcated ways of looking at people, as we heard in the sermon this morning about the parade and the granddaughter. Where did it come from? That was a good question that was asked. Society and advertising, the whole bit, puts these into our mind, they're stereotypes. There are socially inculcated ways of looking at people. If you are of a group that in any way is considered a minority in American society, you know exactly what I'm talking about. I'm aware that even Mike Franch in my bum outfit has some remnant of white privilege. I don't always have to wear a suit and tie to expect at least a measure of respect from society. While we are programmed to see people as belonging to a category, our religion calls on us to see each person as a person. And our task as a worth-seeing individual is to see the person before us as a unique, irreplaceable, valued person, not simply as a member of a group. To perceive that person as a unique individual with unique experiences and whose life is influenced by membership in a category, but is more than that category. And the point I'm trying to make here is that we have many identities and we have to be alert to, and some of these identities give us higher status in society and some of us give us lower status. And it's inevitable that we will at least initially make judgments based on a quick appraisal of externals. But our religion asks us to look beyond this appraisal, to see the person as a person of worth and dignity, and to treat that person as a person of worth and dignity. So, it's a great truth that we have, many characteristics, and we're all, influenced by our gender and our race and our sexuality and other things. But looked at another way, in one way, these differences that really do matter, they do. And they're crucial to identity of the person, and they often determine the choices or opportunities a person has. And we all fall into category, and we need to recognize those categories. And as we attempt to build diverse, pluralistic congregations, it's important for us to see these categories. But a person is not a category. A person is not a category. We want to be perceived as the person we are, not as a representative of our race, our gender, our sexuality, our age, or whatever. In fact, let's take a couple of seconds here to do another thought experiment. Think of all the categories that you fall into. then what is your most important descriptor? What you think of yourself, what you might say in introducing yourself to a stranger. Here's an example of like someone I know might say. He could say, I'm young, I'm African American, I'm gay, but my primary identity is as a student of 17th century European music. Think of me as a musicologist. And now, clearly, you don't do a deep dive into everyone you meet. Our task is not to pry into everyone's lives. Our task is to be alert to everyone's lives. But, not to pry. Some people, after all, are like Emily Dickinson. They live private lives because they want to live private lives. I think of the example that there was a fellow who used to belong to First Unitarian Church, has since died. I'll call him William Smith because that wasn't his name. And I said to him one day, I turned around the pew after the service and said, do you rather be called William or Bill? And he said, Mr. Smith. Okay, I had to ask, and he told me, and that's the way I would address him, because that's the way he wanted to present himself. Some people want to be private, but our task is to pay attention to the person before us in a way appropriate to the situation and circumstance. And here I'm guided by the Protestant theologian Harvey Cox and his book, 1965 book called The Secular City. He contrasts the intimate relations of the small town in Pennsylvania he grew up in, where you knew everything about everybody. The fuel oil delivery person, you know his name, you knew his children, maybe they went to church with your children. The letter carrier was Joe. You knew everybody. Now, living in the big city, he didn't know everybody's name. He didn't have the same relationship with everybody. And, that was okay. But what didn't change, though, in that relationship is the requirement that he taught everybody as a human being. That he treated what I would treat everybody with respect. You don't have to intimately know them. You might have a passive relationship. But I have found in Baltimore, our big issue these days is the squeegee guys that are at the stoplights, cleaning your windshields. And I've discovered it often. Sometimes they do them clean, sometimes they don't. But I've discovered that if I always treat them with respect, they treat me with respect. I don't treat them with respect, so they treat me with respect, but I do it because I'm called to do that. So let's look at this treat them with respect thing. Let me give you some rules here as the final part of this, because I think my job here this morning is not just to harangue you or even to inspire you, but also to give you some tools. So let's think about some circumstances and let's think about some rules, because this is not just about principles to believe in, but about behaviors to exhibit. And here I take the advice of Susan Stebbing, who was an important early 20th century British philosopher. She gave herself, and she gave us, I think, some good advice in a little book published in 1941. She wrote, "My advice to myself and to others is this: be definite. To formulate one's ideals is not to set out a string of maxims. It is to answer questions in the form, what is worth having in such and such specifiable circumstance? Who is the subject of these questions? Morality concerns action. My actions, your actions, their actions, and it starts from my actions." So I'll repeat that last sentence. It's morality concerns actions, and it starts from my actions. Each of us are responsible. So let's be specific. It's one thing to say everyone has respect and dignity. First principle, that's easy, right? And another thing to say we must treat every person as a person of worth and dignity. How do we go about this in different circumstances? Everything I've said this morning leads to this. First, what does it mean to treat everyone as a person of worth and dignity? The word I keep coming back to is respect. Treat everyone with respect. I find it a more useful concept than love. We're big into love in this denomination. Respect is my go-to word for how I should behave. It applies to situations and circumstances that are as varied as the persons you have before you. I know that this will come as easier for some of us than others. Some of us are short of patience. Some of us are quick to form judgments. Some of us get angry easily. It will work more for some than for others. And maybe I emphasize this so much because maybe that's one of my issues that I have to struggle with. And to add to this challenge, I'm talking about baseline behavior here. Treating everyone with respect is not heroics. Treating everyone with respect as a person of worth and dignity doesn't get you sainthood. And this is ordinary, everyday behavior. This is a minimum. It gets you a C, not an A. If it makes it easier for you, I'm not asking you to get buddy-buddy with everyone you meet. Just treat them with respect. And how you do this will vary from situation to situation, from relationship to relationship. A smile and a wave at a squeegee boy, or a squeegee man, there's some of them are really boys these days, might be sufficient. A long chat with a fellow church member during after-church coffee. There are many variables and many levels of respectful behavior. And since respect is complex, it's helpful to have rules. You don't have to believe in the worth and dignity of every individual in order to treat them with respect. We need pathways to ethical living. A rule won't tell us specifically what to do in every circumstance, but it will still require discernment, but we'll have some idea how to behave. So rules, and humankind has had lots of rules. The most important and simplest is the so-called golden rule, and you'll find versions of it attributed to Confucius, to Rabbis Hillel and Akiva, and to Jesus. And it takes two basic forms. There's the older form, which is a negative form. Don't do unto others as you would them do unto you. I mean, that's sort of self-explanatory. And the positive and maybe more ethically developed form, do unto others as you would have done unto you. This is a little bit more ethically advanced because it urges behavior, not doing something. It's no big deal to say, don't go over and hit somebody on the head because you don't want to be hit on the head. I mean, it's one thing. But the other thing is, treat someone well because you wanted to be treated something well. That gets more complicated. Okay, so far so good. It's a simple rule. You don't have to be a theologian to study it. But the golden rule doesn't offer much guidance for behavior and has one big deficiency. When you come right down to it, it starts from you. What do you not want to have done to you? What do you like? What would you like to have done to you? So this deficiency bothered Felix Adler, whom I mentioned a few moments ago. It might seem like hours ago by now. And Adler's version of the Golden Rule, he called it his supreme ethical rule, and I've seen it referred to as the Platinum Rule, is this: act so as to elicit the best in others and thereby in yourself. Let me repeat this because I found it really works. Act so as to elicit the best in others and thereby in yourself. It differs from the traditional version in that you begin not by considering yourself, what you like and what you don't like, but by considering the other. You have to be open to the other. What is the best in the other? You have to pay attention to the other. I often don't know what the best cause of action is. I often don't know what will bring out the best in the other. But I do know that there are ways that I can behave that'll bring out the worst in me. I've thought of this. I define this as my anti-jerk rule. I know ways that I can, I have a quick and I can have a quick and somewhat nasty workings of my mind. And I can make rejoinders that are really going to make the situation worse, And just keeping this in my mind has prevented me from doing that. So I've taken this as my guide for decades, and I tell you it works. I will not always do the right thing, but it helps me from doing the wrong thing. And while I might not know what specific action to take in specific circumstances, I know that, as Susan Stebbing wrote 80-some years ago, that morality starts with my actions. I want to be respected. I want to be respectful of others. I want to live in a respectful world. All this starts from my actions. So let's conclude by going back to that profound discussion that I opened my sermon with, back sitting on the floor with the kids. That do we really have to believe in worth? Does something we call worth really exist? Did people maybe just think it up because they needed a God substitute? It really doesn't matter as long as we believe that our behavior counts and that we should act on the assumption that our behavior counts. It's our behavior that counts. Follow the rule, treat everyone with respect. In that way, you become a person worthy of respect yourself and a person who is helping to create a better world. A world in which everyone's worth and dignity is respected, even if it seems like maybe they've used it up. So, I know I've gone on long, we'll sit for a minute, and then my favorite part of the service is hearing what you have to say.
Well, we're running so late that
Okay, I'm sorry.
does anyone have anything that they would like to add or questions for Dr. French? Okay, I think this could have been a wonderful discussion. Unfortunately, our time is running so late, so I'll go right into closing words. And so in the end, we can never forget who we are or whose we are and our deep connection and accountability to each other. When we lose that essential memory of our worth and connection, then the disconnect happens. Then the door opens to fear. Then we create the other, however that other is going to present in our lives. Karen Armstrong reminds us that our relationships won't get mended until we grant others the same grace we grant ourselves, until we widen our view and notice that there are circumstances wounding us both. The painful gap will never be healed. And so I leave you with a beautiful Hindu word that reminds us of our connection, Namaste. It is said in greeting. It means the divine in me greets the divine in you. The inherent worth and dignity in me greets the inherent worth and dignity in you. And so may it be. And now I'm going to extinguish the flame. If you'll join, the words are in your order of service. May extinguish this flame, not like the truth, or the community, the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we meet again. Yes, have a good day. Of belonging and love. Have a wonderful week, and now join us for fellowship and coffee. Thank you.